Grace sat on the cold, unforgiving sidewalk, her weathered hands clutching a small cardboard sign that read, "Please help." The vibrant hustle of the city buzzed around her, but she remained a quiet observer, her spirit unbroken despite the biting wind that cut through her thin, layered clothes. A small, unassuming figure against the backdrop of rushing pedestrians and honking cars, she wore a smile that had become both a shield and a beacon of warmth. "Good morning," she greeted a passing woman, whose eyes briefly flickered down at Grace before shifting away. The woman hurried past, clutching her designer handbag as if it were a lifeline. Grace sighed softly but maintained her smile. "Have a blessed day," she called after her, hoping that her words might linger in the woman's mind, if only for a moment. As the sun climbed higher, casting its golden rays over the city, a young man named Jake approached her. He was in his early 20s, with tousled hair and a guitar slung over his shoulder. He had a hopeful gleam in his eye, one that reminded Grace of the dreams she once held tightly. "Hey there! Do you mind if I sit for a moment?" he asked, his voice cheerful and bright. "Of course not, dear," Grace replied, gesturing to the small patch of concrete beside her. "What brings you out here today?" Jake plopped down next to her, a wide grin breaking across his face. "I'm trying to get my music career off the ground. I just auditioned for a local band. If they like me, I might get to perform at a big gig next month." "Oh, that sounds wonderful. Music has a way of touching the heart, doesn't it?" Grace replied, her eyes sparkling with genuine enthusiasm. "Yeah, I've been writing songs about my life, about struggles and dream," he said, his fingers absent-mindedly strumming the strings of his guitar. "But sometimes it feels like I'm just shouting into the void." Grace nodded, her heart aching for the young man. "Remember, Jake, perseverance is key. Every great musician faced rejection before they found their voice. Just keep going, and don't forget to be kind to those who cross your path. You never know what they might be going through." Jake paused, taking in her words. "You're right. I guess I just need to stay focused and believe in myself." "You have a beautiful spirit," Grace said, her voice warm and reassuring. "That will take you far." As they chatted, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, painting the horizon in hues of orange and pink. The bustling city continued its frantic pace, but Grace felt momentarily uplifted by the connection they had forged. Just then, the calm was interrupted by the roar of an engine. A sleek, luxurious SUV pulled up beside her, its headlights blinding in the evening light. Grace squinted, puzzled as the vehicle's door swung open. A well-dressed woman emerged, impeccably styled, with an air of confidence that commanded attention. Evelyn, as she would later introduce herself, stepped out and approached Grace with a purposeful stride. Grace's heart raced. The contrast between the woman's elegance and her own ragged appearance was stark, and for a moment she felt an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. "Excuse me," Evelyn said, her voice smooth and inviting. "I couldn't help but notice you here. May I offer you something to eat?" Grace blinked, taken aback by the unexpected kindness. "Oh, that's very generous of you, but I'm fine. Really." Evelyn smiled, shaking her head gently. "Please let me share a sandwich with you. It's not just about the food. I'd love to chat for a moment." Grace hesitated, her instincts warning her to be cautious. She had learned to be wary of strangers, especially those who seemed too good to be true. But there was something in Evelyn's eyes, a warm sincerity that sparked a flicker of hope within Grace. "All right then," she said slowly, her curiosity piqued. "I'd be grateful for the company." As Evelyn reached into the SUV to retrieve a neatly wrapped sandwich, Grace felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. Why was this woman, so seemingly out of place in her world, offering her kindness? The city around them continued to move, oblivious to the moment unfolding between two very different lives. But in that instant, Grace sensed that her life was about to change forever. Evelyn knelt beside Grace, her soft smile contrasting sharply with the harshness of the street. "Hello, I'm Evelyn," she said, extending her hand, her voice warm yet tinged with an air of mystery. "I noticed you here, and I couldn't help but want to share something with you." She produced a sandwich from a bag, the aroma of fresh bread and ham wafting through the chilly air. "Would you like this?" Grace's eyes widened as she glanced from the sandwich to Evelyn's kind gaze. The street had usually offered her meager scraps, but a sandwich like this felt like a treasure. However, the suddenness of the encounter left her hesitant. "Thank you, dear, but she began, instinctively clutching her worn blanket tighter around her shoulders, as if it could shield her from the unpredictability of this moment. "You don't have to be afraid," Evelyn assured her voice gentle as she studied Grace's face. "I just want to help. I can offer you more than just this sandwich. If you're open to it, I'd like you to join me in my car." Grace's heart raced at the proposition. A part of her craved the warmth and comfort of the SUV, but another part warned her of the dangers lurking behind such unexpected kindness. "Why would you want to help me?" she asked, her brow furrowing with suspicion. The streets had taught her to be cautious, to question every act of kindness. Evelyn sighed softly, her eyes reflecting a depth of understanding. "Because I see you," she replied earnestly. "You have a spirit that shines even in hard times. I know life can be overwhelming, and sometimes all it takes is a little support to find a way back." After a long pause, Grace felt the flicker of hope spark within her, battling against years of skepticism. "All right," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll come." With that, she gingerly climbed into the back seat of the SUV, feeling the plush leather beneath her. Evelyn settled into the driver's seat, and as the engine purred to life, she turned to Grace. "I'm a social worker," she explained, her tone light yet sincere. "I help people navigate through tough times, and I believe you deserve a second chance." Grace looked out the window as the city's skyline whizzed by, a blur of memories and forgotten dreams flashing before her eyes. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice thick with vulnerability. "I'm not sure I'm worth saving." Evelyn glanced in the rearview mirror, concern etched on her face. "You're worth it, Grace. I may not know your story, but I can see the kindness in you. I want to provide you with the resources to help you start anew." Grace's heart began to race as she contemplated the possibilities. The warmth of the car contrasted with the chill she had grown accustomed to on the streets. "I've made so many mistakes," she murmured, looking down at her hands which bore the marks of hardship. As they drove through the bustling city, Evelyn's curiosity began to draw Grace out. "Tell me about your life, if you're comfortable," she prompted gently, her eyes focused on the road but her heart open to Grace's words. Taking a deep breath, Grace leaned back in her seat, her voice trembling as she began to share snippets of her past. "I had a family once, a husband, a daughter," she started, the memories flooding her mind, a bittersweet blend of love and loss. "But after the accident, everything fell apart. I lost them both." Evelyn's eyes widened in empathy, her heart aching for the woman before her. "I'm so sorry, Grace. That sounds incredibly painful. What happened to your daughter?" Grace paused, her face tightening at the mention of her lost child. "She was just a little girl, a bright light in my life. I thought I could protect her. But—" her voice trailed off, choked by the weight of unspoken grief. "I failed her." Evelyn remained silent, allowing Grace the space to gather her thoughts. "I haven't seen her since that day," Grace continued, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't even know if she's alive." Evelyn's heart raced at the gravity of Grace's words. "What was her name?" she asked softly. "Emily," Grace replied, the name hanging in the air like a ghost from her past. "Emily." As they drove through the city, the lights twinkling like stars against the night sky, Grace felt an unfamiliar sensation. Could this be the beginning of something new? Could Evelyn be the key to unlocking a future she thought was lost forever? Hope mingled with fear, leaving her heart in a tumult of emotions as the journey continued, and the shadows of her past began to stir within the confines of the SUV. Grace stepped out of the SUV, the warm scent of coffee and freshly baked pastries wafting through the air as she approached the cozy diner. The small bell above the door jingled softly as she entered, and she was met with the inviting sight of red vinyl booths and a counter lined with gleaming chrome. Evelyn followed closely behind, her heels clicking on the tiled floor, a contrast to Grace's worn sneakers. "Right this way," Evelyn said, motioning to a booth near the back, where a kind-faced man was already seated, flipping through a stack of papers. "This is Tom, the director of the local charity I mentioned." "Nice to meet you, Grace," Tom said, his voice warm and welcoming. He gestured for her to take a seat. "Evelyn has told me a bit about you. We're excited to see how we can help." Grace slid into the booth, feeling a mix of gratitude and apprehension. The atmosphere felt so different from the cold streets she was used to, yet the idea of leaving that life behind stirred a deep conflict within her. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn took a seat across from her, her expression encouraging yet serious. "We want to discuss some options for shelter and support, Grace. We know it's a big change, but we believe it could really help you." Tom nodded, his eyes sincere. "I understand this might feel overwhelming, but consider this: a safe place to sleep, meals provided, and access to resources that can help you get back on your feet. It's a chance for a fresh start." Grace looked down at her hands, her heart racing. The thought of leaving the streets felt like losing a part of herself, her independence, her routine. I don't know. I've been out there for so long. It's what I know." Evelyn leaned in, her voice gentle. "I know it's scary, Grace, but think about the possibility of a better life. You deserve that. You've shown so much strength already." Before Grace could respond, Evelyn's phone buzzed sharply on the table. The sound sliced through the air, and Evelyn glanced at the screen, her expression shifting to one of concern. "Excuse me for a moment," she said, standing up and moving a few steps away to take the call. Grace watched her, a knot forming in her stomach. What could be so urgent? She felt a wave of anxiety wash over her, but before she could dwell on it, Tom addressed her. "Take your time to think about what we've discussed. It's not an easy decision, but we're here to support you." "Thank you, Tom," Grace replied, her voice steadier now. "It just feels like I'm leaving everything behind." "Sometimes leaving behind what weighs us down is the first step toward finding what lifts us up," he said, offering a reassuring smile. "You're not alone in this. We'll be with you every step of the way." As Grace pondered his words, she caught a glimpse of Evelyn from the corner of her eye, her expression tight as she spoke on the phone. The conversation seemed intense, and Grace couldn't help but feel a twinge of worry. What if this opportunity was slipping through her fingers? When Evelyn returned, her demeanor was slightly altered, the urgency in her eyes still present. "I'm sorry about that," she said, sliding back into the booth. "Just a matter I needed to address." Grace narrowed her eyes, sensing the tension. "Is everything all right?" Evelyn hesitated for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. "It's complicated, but I want to focus on you right now," she said, attempting to regain her composure. "Let's talk more about the shelter. I believe it's a perfect fit for you." Just then, a steaming cup of coffee was placed in front of Grace, the warmth seeping through her fingers as she wrapped both hands around the mug. She took a sip, savoring the taste, and for a moment, it felt like a slice of normalcy in her chaotic world. "I lost my mother when I was younger," Evelyn said, her gaze distant as she looked past Grace. "It changed everything for me. I know what it's like to feel lost, to grieve, but I also learned that sometimes opening yourself up to new beginnings can lead to healing." Grace looked at Evelyn, their eyes meeting with an understanding that transcended their different lives. "Did you ever find closure?" she asked softly, her heart aching with empathy. Evelyn nodded slowly. "In a way, it took time, and I had to confront a lot of fears. I learned that we carry our loved ones with us, even when they're gone. They'd want us to live fully, to embrace life." "I'm scared of starting over," Grace admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "What if I fail again?" Evelyn reached across the table, placing her hand gently over Grace's. "You won't be alone. We'll face it together. You have the strength within you, Grace. Just take that first step. You deserve to find your peace." In that moment, Grace felt a flicker of hope igniting within her, a hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she could find her way back to a life she once dreamed of. But it would take courage, and the shadows of her past still loomed large. As they stepped out of the cozy diner, the late afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the bustling streets. Grace felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension bubbling within her. The weight of her past loomed heavily, yet there was a flicker of hope ignited by Evelyn's unwavering kindness. The thought of a new beginning, however daunting, seemed tantalizingly close. "Let's head to the community center," Evelyn suggested, her voice warm and encouraging. "I think you'll find it inspiring. So many have turned their lives around there." She glanced at Grace, her eyes sparkling with genuine enthusiasm. Grace nodded, her heart racing at the prospect of meeting others who had walked similar paths. "You really think I could fit in there?" she asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Absolutely," Evelyn replied, offering her a reassuring smile. "Everyone has a story, and yours is just as important as theirs. Just remember, it's not about where you came from, but where you choose to go from here." As they made their way down the sidewalk, Grace took in the familiar sights of the city, the honking cars, the chatter of people, and the aroma of street food wafting through the air. Yet something felt different today. Perhaps it was the company she kept, or the promise of change that lingered in the air. Suddenly a figure caught her eye, a man standing at a street corner, his back turned towards her. Grace's heart dropped. It couldn't be. Panic surged through her as she stopped abruptly, her breath hitching in her throat. "Grace, what's wrong?" Evelyn asked, turning to her with concern. Grace's face drained of color. I, I think I know that man," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't seen him in years." Evelyn followed her gaze, her brow furrowing slightly. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Grace whispered, her mind racing back to memories she had tried to bury. "It's Tom." "Tom," Evelyn repeated, a note of recognition in her tone. "Is he someone from your past?" Trembling, Grace nodded, her eyes glued to the figure. The man was laughing with a group of friends, his carefree demeanor in stark contrast to the turmoil inside her. She thought of the life they once shared and the hurt that had driven them apart. "Maybe you should talk to him," Evelyn suggested gently, sensing the emotional storm brewing within Grace. "You never know what might happen." "I can't," Grace replied, shaking her head vigorously. "Not now, not here. What if he doesn't even want to see me?" "Or maybe he does," Evelyn countered, her tone soft yet firm. "You have the chance to face your past. It could be the closure you need." Grace felt torn, her heart racing with conflicting emotions. She wanted to run, to hide, to retreat back into the safety of anonymity. But a part of her yearned for connection, for understanding. She had spent years avoiding the pain, yet here it stood before her, palpable and real. "Grace," Evelyn said, reaching out to place a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Whatever happens, I'm right here with you. You can do this." Just then, Grace caught Tom's eye. For a brief moment, their gazes locked, and time seemed to freeze. She could see the flicker of recognition in his expression, the way his laughter faltered as he processed the sight of her. A myriad of emotions crossed his face: surprise, confusion, and perhaps a hint of regret. "Evelyn, Grace's voice broke, her heart thundering in her chest. "Just breathe," Evelyn urged, her grip steadying Grace. "You have the strength to face this. Take a moment." As Grace stood there, paralyzed by the weight of her past and the uncertainty of the future, she felt a rush of memories flood her mind. Moments of laughter, love, pain, and loss. She had spent so long in the shadows, but now, the light of possibility beckoned her to step into the open. "Okay," Grace finally whispered, her voice steadier. "I'll talk to him." With a deep breath, she took a step forward, determination bubbling within her. Each step felt monumental as she approached Tom, who was now looking directly at her, his expression shifting from confusion to something more profound. The world around them faded away, and all that remained was the connection of shared history, the weight of unresolved feelings hovering in the air. Evelyn watched from a distance, her heart filled with hope for Grace, knowing that this moment could lead to something transformative, something that might change everything. Grace was finally ready to confront the ghosts of her past, and as she took that step, the possibilities felt endless. Grace's heart raced as she pressed herself against Evelyn's side, her breath quickening. The bustling crowd at the community center seemed to swirl around her, a cacophony of laughter and chatter that felt like a distant storm. Evelyn, sensing Grace's distress, turned to her with a calm demeanor. It's okay, Grace. You don't have to face him alone. Just breathe. I can't, Grace whispered, her eyes darting toward the man who had just entered the room. Tom. The name tasted bitter on her tongue, a reminder of everything she had lost and the pain she had tried to bury under layers of survival. What if he doesn't want to see me? What if he... Grace, you're stronger than you think, Evelyn interjected, placing a reassuring hand on Grace's shoulder. This could be your moment to find closure or maybe even something more. You deserve to tell your story. Taking a deep breath, Grace felt the warmth of Evelyn's encouragement seep through her trepidation, but anxiety clawed at her heart. Tom had been a part of a life that felt light years away, a life filled with dreams and love, before everything had crumbled into darkness. She felt as if she were being pulled in two different directions, one leading her to the safety of anonymity, the other to the terrifying possibility of reconciliation. And then, as if the universe had decided for her, Tom looked up. Their eyes locked, and time seemed to freeze. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by a dawning realization. Grace, he called out, his voice tinged with disbelief. Grace's heart pounded in her chest, a drumbeat that echoed her internal struggle. She wanted to bolt, to disappear into the crowd, but her feet remained rooted in place. Evelyn, sensing the tension, stepped back slightly, giving them space. Tom, she finally managed, her voice trembling. She could see the years etched on his face, lines of regret and sorrow that mirrored her own. He took a step closer, his gaze softening. I can't believe it's really you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. After all this time. I thought you were gone, Grace replied, her throat tight. Memories surged through her. Laughter, arguments, the day they lost everything. I didn't know if I'd ever see you again. I tried to find you, he admitted, his eyes darkening with guilt. After everything happened, I was lost. I didn't know how to reach out. I thought you'd never want to see me again. Why would you think that? Grace's voice cracked, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air between them. You left me. You disappeared when I needed you the most. Tom flinched at her words but didn't look away. I know I hurt you. I can't change the past. But I've thought about you every day. I've wanted to explain, to apologize. Apologize? Grace echoed, her heart a tumult of emotions. Apologies don't change what happened. You were supposed to be my partner. Where were you when I needed you? I was scared, Tom admitted, his voice raw. I didn't know how to handle everything. I thought you'd be better off without me. I was a coward. Cowardice doesn't erase the pain, she shot back, anger bubbling beneath the surface. You left me to navigate the wreckage alone? I had to survive, Tom. I had to pick up the pieces without you. I know, he said, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. And I'm so sorry. I wish I could take it all back. But I'm here now. I want to make it right, if you'll let me. Grace's breath hitched. The idea of rebuilding something, anything with Tom was terrifying. Yet deep down, a flicker of hope ignited within her. Could she really allow herself to believe in the possibility of forgiveness? What do you want from me? She asked, her voice steadying despite the tempest inside her. I just want a chance, Tom replied, his sincerity palpable. A chance to show you I've changed, that I'm not the same person I was back then. Can we start over? For a moment, silence enveloped them, the noise of the community center fading into a muffled hum. Grace's heart ached with memories, both good and devastating. She glanced at Evelyn, who stood a few feet away, watching with a hopeful expression. Maybe, she finally whispered, the word hanging in the air like a fragile promise. But it won't be easy. Tom nodded, a glimmer of relief breaking through his somber expression. I'm ready to fight for it, Grace. I'll do whatever it takes. As they stood there, the world around them faded away, leaving just the two of them poised on the brink of something uncertain yet transformative. In that moment, Grace realized that perhaps confronting her past didn't mean being consumed by it. It could be the first step toward reclaiming her future. Grace took a deep breath, feeling a rush of empowerment coursing through her veins as she stepped into the community center. The walls were adorned with colorful murals depicting hope and resilience, and the air buzzed with the warmth of camaraderie. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of optimism. Evelyn walked beside her, her presence reassuring, as they made their way to a small room where a support group was already gathered. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Grace," Evelyn announced, her voice bright with encouragement. The group, a mix of ages and backgrounds, turned to greet Grace with friendly smiles. They offered gentle waves, and one woman, her hair streaked with silver, stood up and approached her. "Welcome, Grace. I'm Maria. We're so glad you're here," she said, her voice soft and inviting. Grace felt her heart swell at the kindness that surrounded her. "Thank you," Grace replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced at Evelyn, who nodded encouragingly, prompting her to share her story. As Grace began to speak, she felt a strange mix of vulnerability and strength. "I've lived on the streets for a long time," she admitted, her hands trembling slightly. "But I've always tried to stay kind, to help others when I could." The room listened intently, and she continued, recounting her struggles, her dreams that had long been buried. "I once had a family," she said, her voice breaking, "but I lost them, and I lost myself along the way." "Grace, you're not alone anymore," a young man named Kevin interjected, his eyes filled with empathy. "We've all faced our demons, but we're here to support each other. You can start anew, just like I did." Grace felt the warmth of their encouragement envelop her, and for the first time in years, the weight on her heart began to lighten. She shared more about her life, her hopes, her regrets, and the longing for connection that had driven her through the toughest times. The group responded with stories of their own, creating an atmosphere of shared understanding and compassion. As Grace immersed herself in the stories around her, she started to feel an unanticipated sense of belonging. She laughed at the light-hearted moments, felt the sting of shared sorrow, and discovered a community that accepted her without judgment. But just as Grace was finding her footing, Evelyn's phone buzzed sharply, cutting through the room's warmth. Evelyn's face paled as she read the message. The warmth drained from her expression, replaced by a look of urgency that Grace hadn't seen before. "Excuse me for a moment," Evelyn murmured, stepping outside the room. Grace watched her leave, an uneasy feeling settling in her stomach. Moments later, Evelyn returned, her demeanor altered. "Grace," she began, her voice low and serious, "I need to tell you something important. Something about our connection." Grace's heart raced at the word connection. It was as if the air had thickened around them, and she could sense the gravity of Evelyn's words. "What is it?" Grace asked, her voice trembling. "It's about your daughter," Evelyn said, her eyes locking onto Grace's. "I've been looking into your past for a reason, something I didn't expect." Grace felt her breath catch in her throat. Memories surged within her, long buried and painful. "My daughter?" she echoed, barely able to comprehend the weight of the revelation. "Yes," Evelyn replied, her voice steady yet filled with urgency. "I believe I have information that could change everything for you." The room around Grace faded into a blur. She could hardly register the chatter of the support group behind her. All she could focus on was Evelyn's revelation. "What do you mean?" she pressed, her heart pounding fiercely. Evelyn leaned closer, her voice almost a whisper. "There are pieces of your past that might connect us in ways you can't even imagine, but you need to hear this now before it's too late." Grace's mind reeled as she processed the shocking possibility. The prospect of reconnecting with her daughter sent waves of hope and fear crashing over her. What could this mean for her future? Would she finally be able to mend the broken ties that had haunted her for so long? "Tell me," Grace urged, anxiety coursing through her. "Please, I need to know." Evelyn took a deep breath, her expression resolute, but before she could speak, the phone buzzed again, interrupting them. Evelyn glanced at the screen, her pallor deepening. I I need to take this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I promise, we'll talk more. You deserve to know the truth." As Evelyn stepped away, Grace stood frozen, her heart racing. She felt a whirlwind of emotions, hope mingled with dread. Everything she thought she knew was on the verge of unraveling, and she was left on the precipice of a revelation that could change her life forever.